This is John Mayle, the Martin County Ecosystem Division Manager. And this is a presentation to provide an update to the board on the Lake Okeechobee System Operating Manual Development process. Martin County in 2018 in October assembled a team of internal and external specialists to participate as stakeholders in the development of a new lake schedule that was directed to be developed by the Army Corps as a result of the 2018 Water Resources Development Act. And it was directed to coincide with the completion of the Herbert Hoover Dike repairs. So our first step was to develop a pretty thorough scoping document that really would guide the rest of our activities as stakeholders advocating for Martin County's interests. And then we transitioned into a phase of working with the Army Corps to develop performance measures, performance metrics, performance indices that would all be used to evaluate the adverse impacts or the beneficial impacts to each stakeholder by every plan that comes out. And then as of about the last update I think I brought to the board, October of last year, the Corps of Engineers released 27,000 conceptual plans that met two restrictions. The first was that it could not violate the risk threshold for the Herbert Hoover Dike, and it couldn't violate the water quality limits that were set legally for Everglades National Park. So everything else came through, and they were all kind of oriented towards stakeholder interests. Of those 27,000, there was quite a few that were specifically geared towards eliminating any non-emergency discharges to the St. Lucie River. As of February 22nd, we've kind of completed the analysis of those, and we, as stakeholders that have all put forward plans that we thought fairly represented each stakeholder's interests. Martin County's, all of the Martin County constituents collectively submitted from a suite of plans that eliminated any non-emergency discharges. And we'll get into those in just a second. But I want to point out on the lower right-hand corner of this slide, this is where we're going, and we'll talk about that in a little bit more detail shortly. So these next two pages illustrate the 10 plans that stakeholders put forward from the Pareto analysis to represent their individual interests, and 4 plans that were developed either as a requirement of the Water Resources Development Act or by individual stakeholders that created their own plans. You'll notice, I'm not going to go through each one of these, but you'll notice towards the bottom, the description, enhance ecology in St. Lucie Estuary. There was a recommended plan that the Corps selected based on input from all the Martin County stakeholders in the 4C1 category. That was Plan 22448, which eliminates discharges to the St. Lucie River except for emergency discharges that are in the high band. One of the things that we have been advocating in the balancing conversation, which is where we're at now, is how many of these 4C1 plans that were brought forward by Martin County stakeholders also work quite well for many of the other stakeholders. And this is illustrated on this slide, particularly in that if you look up at Plan 2B, that plan was selected to represent the needs of recreation on Lake Okeechobee. You'll notice that the recommended plan is a 4C1, which is one of the plans that was developed to eliminate discharges to the St. Lucie River. It happens that many of those plans also work well for many of the other stakeholders, so much so that the recreation stakeholders chose one of those plans as well. This is where I want to spend the bulk of the presentation today. As of February 22nd, as I said, we started into the discussion about how to balance stakeholder interests and come up with actual schedules that the Corps believes would balance all the stakeholders' needs and benefits. We put forward primarily this group of arguments, largely that were addressed in our scoping comments and we have been advocating for throughout the entire process, because we believe this makes the best argument for us for balancing those schedules in favor of reducing discharges. So I'll just briefly touch on each of those. The first is that there really never was a historic connection to the St. Lucie River by Lake Okeechobee. There's actually two ridges that divided the lake from Alapata Flats from the St. Lucie Estuary, and lake water never historically would have in any stage of the lake overflowed into the St. Lucie River. It made us unique as a stakeholder that our connection to Lake Okeechobee is completely engineered. Along those lines, there's also no ecological benefit in our relationship to Lake Okeechobee. There are stakeholders that have enhanced relationships to the lake by engineering, but then they also have an ecological dependency on the lake. We have only an adverse relationship with the lake. And one of the arguments that we have been making at every opportunity is that we believe the Corps of Engineers has a responsibility to reduce or eliminate any damages in their system before they start to parse out benefits, of which we have no participation. In the evaluation of these different plans, salinity has kind of been the key indicator, but we continue to make it abundantly clear that salinity is not the only factor. Salinity is just a useful indice for a lot of other factors, including nutrients, for which the St. Lucie River is impaired, nitrogen and phosphorus, and suspended solids, for which our primary suspended solid contribution to the estuary comes from the C44. While we get nutrients from lots of sources, almost all of the suspended solids or muck that comes to the river comes through the C44. There's another point that we are increasingly making is that while one of the stated purposes of developing a new lake schedule was the management or the risk associated with harmful algal blooms, and to date the Corps has been unable to come up with a metric that appropriately applies to the plan for capturing HAB impacts to the estuary. That's a pretty important issue, and it's one that has not been addressed. We believe and have been advocating that that calls for a certain conservativeness with discharges if they've been unable to model the impacts of it, that it requires of them that they be more conservative in the schedule development. Along those same lines, we provided some very good information on the correlation between discharges and impacts to coral reef on our nearshore reef. And they were unable to model that, or unwilling to model it, maybe better said. And so the plan is going to be without an appropriate measure of the impact to our nearshore coral reef. We believe that's another reason for conservativeness in a schedule that discharges to the St. Lucie River. Another factor that makes us somewhat unique as recipients of Lake Okeechobee water is that we don't get any water quality treatment for the water that comes to us, well, most of the other stakeholders that get water from Lake Okeechobee, they get it from a shallow area that has vegetated littoral shelf that has demonstrated empirical nutrient and sediment removal qualities. Ours comes right out of the deep part of the lake, or like scientists like to call it, the pelagic zone. And it's 1 for 1. Whatever nutrients and suspended solids are in that part of the lake come to the estuary. And we also believe that, like I said earlier, that, and have been saying with increasing passion, is that there's an obligation to stop the adversity of the relationship before they start parsing out the benefits. Coming up next, we've got a couple of months that are probably the most critical of this entire process. So like I said, February 22nd, we really began the balancing discussion. That will continue until April 12th, when we expect that the Corps will have developed their first array of actual schedules. We believe that there'll be 9 schedules presented to the stakeholders. And we will, at that point, we'll continue the conversation about our balancing objectives and concepts. And then less than a month later, they're telling us there'll be 3 schedules. And by July, we'll have 1 schedule. And from that schedule, they'll develop the environmental impact statement and a record of decision by the end of the year. So we really are at a critical time for the public to be engaged. And we're encouraging everyone that has an interest in this to use these balancing concepts that we've put forth and any of their own that we've got a lot of intelligent, creative people working on this in our constituency. But most importantly, we need folks engaged over the next couple months. I know that Martha Ann and Laura in our communications office, we're working closely with them to make sure that these meetings are advertised well and that our local constituents are aware of them and can participate. So I know that you're probably all a little bit interested in what's happening right now. So this is not directly related to the development of Losom, but we have fairly high lake conditions for this time of year. In fact, we're discharging as of the early part of March. We've started receiving 500 CFS, or about 300 million gallons a day, and there's really that's going to continue probably throughout the dry season. Nobody ever knows exactly what's going to happen with the weather, but as it is now, the Army Corps would like to get the lake to 12.5 feet by June 1st. There's about a 1% chance of that happening without having some significant discharge or releases from Lake Okeechobee. As of now, like I said, they're discharging 500 CFS to us, about 2,000 CFS to the west, of which a significant portion is beneficial. And then about 2,500 CFS is going south. It appears mostly for irrigation, but it's still water going south. About 1,000 CFS is going to Everglades National Park as of today. I'm not going to show you I'm not going to belabor this one because that's usually antiquated the day after we post it. The lake level today is about 14.75, so 14 3/4 feet. If you look at this chart, this is from the Corps of Engineers. This shows the last 2.5 years, and this blue shaded area shows the lake level. And you can see we had a very good recession rate in the dry season of 2019, which brought us to 10.79 feet on June 1st, 2019. You'll remember 2019, we had no discharges. And we had a short and dry wet season that year. We ended the year at 13.97, had a typical dry season, and ended June 1st of 2020 at 11 feet. This year, without discharges, the 50% probability is about 13.5 feet by June 1st. That extra foot would come from the releases that the Corps is using right now, and it's happening under the HAB deviation. I won't go into detail on that, but I would say, I'm not a gambling person, but I'd say there's about an 80% chance we'll have summer discharges that would likely, almost certainly, have blue-green algae. So this conversation continues to be extremely germane, and it's just behoove of us to continue to stay engaged at the highest level on the development of this lake schedule. With that, I'd take any questions.
Great. That was a great presentation. Commissioner Smith.
I agree, John. Thank you. Just 2 thoughts. One, do we at some point, as those 9 or 6 recommendations that will be coming out, do we as a commission weigh in on them as to our preferences, or is it just moving through a process that we don't actually get a say?
We'll have significant opportunity. Members of your staff are on the project delivery team, and then there's also opportunities for the public at large to input.
I mean the board, though.
So at your direction, if you'd like us to bring them to you, we would be happy to follow your direction on that, and then we could kind of walk you through. So when we get those schedules, there's a copious amount of data that comes with them about all the impacts to performance measures, and we could have it's up to you, but we could do a workshop, or we could meet with you one-on-one, however you'd like to do it.
I think it'd be helpful. I think we should be engaged in it as well. I think that third to last slide where you had the positions. Keep going back. There you go. That was spot on. I mean, I don't know that it could be, I'm sure it could be different, but I think that sums up our, at least how I think about this stuff, and some of it I never would have thought about, but it's great. But I think at some point we should be saying we prefer this as a commission, as a county direction. Secondly to that, relative to Martha Ann and her strategy, not only should we be informing the stakeholders, but I think publicly we should be communicating out our position through her to the media, to everybody else, that this is where Martin County stands on this stuff, and why and how, and telling our story. The hardest part you get into something like this is somebody else telling our story and the way they want to tell it versus how this has been outlined and how you just did exactly what you did. You've told our story, our piece of it, which I think is brilliant. And again, thank you.
Certainly.
Thank you. Commissioner Hearn.
Were there any significant updates yesterday?
Yesterday was more the core gathering input from us. There's some, you can get into the weeds pretty quickly, but there are some nuances that we needed to have answers to. For example, for S308 regulatory flows, the future without condition was worse than our baseline, which is our existing condition. And with the addition of the C44 reservoir this year, there's no explanation for that. So we're trying to get the modelers to explain why that is. One of the things that's come to light is that just in the last 24 hours is that the Kissimmee River restoration recently ratified their operations manual, and I think everyone expected that restoration effort would result in less wet season flows into the lake and dry season releases, and it did just the opposite according to the model. And so now we're focusing. This is kind of like bopple mold, but they're giant, arduous moles to bop. So we are now trying to unpack how did that happen, what does it mean, and what opportunities do we have to suggest a change to that. And I think we'll have a lot of partners among the lake stakeholders in that effort. So the other thing that we brought up yesterday, we continue to bring up all these things. I lost my train of thought. I'm sorry. We were talking about the.
Also, there are no performance measures for impacts to nearshore coral, but the presentation that we had 2 weeks ago said that we have indeed created our own baseline for the last 4 years, so we should have plenty of information to provide. Presumably, we are providing that information.
Yeah, precisely, Commissioner Hurd. In fact, we sent them, more or less an assembled performance measure for coral last fall, and we were not willing to own that performance measure because they should own that piece, and they weren't willing to develop it at this stage in the game. We think it's an issue of great concern for us, and it's one we'll continue to bring up. And potentially it's one that leverages an outcome for us. In fact, the fact that they weren't able to address that, and yes, the correlation rate is significantly higher than some of the existing correlations that were used as performance measures in the system. So, yep, absolutely.
And I agree with Commissioner Smith that it's absolutely imperative over the next, until July, until we get the final results before the record of decision, we need to make sure that our citizens know what we're doing, are engaged, know how to participate. We need to start doing those things now, because I agree with you. I think that this summer is going to be disastrous for us, particularly if the rains were anything like they were in October and November. So that we're going to have harmful algal blooms because the lake is so high right now, and the temperatures have been so much higher than historically they are. So I think it's you've done a terrific job. I'm really, really proud of the team that we've assembled, and but we need to make sure that Martin County residents are participating with us.
I agree. Great. Thank you for that presentation.
Thank you very much.